The synthesis bay was empty at the gap between rotations, which was why Tigao had chosen it. The Roman had built the feeding schedule the way the Roman built everything, with lines and structure and a certainty that the world would conform to his expectations if he drew the lines clearly enough. 60 people at a time, 3 rotations, a gap of perhaps a quarter watch between the last group clearing the bay and the first group of the next cycle filing in. Tigao ate in the gap. The food itself was indifferent to company. It was what the dark-haired woman, the one who read the machines, had coaxed from the synthesis matrix after 6 days of patient argument with its logic, a warm, dense block the color of clay, faintly grainy, faintly sweet in the way that all the machine's outputs were faintly sweet, as though sweetness were the only flavor it understood with any confidence. It was real food now. The compressed gray slabs of the first days replaced by something that at least remembered what food was supposed to be. The woman had broken through whatever calibration the combine had set and reprogrammed the output accordingly. Idevi would not have called it food. But it was closer than the slabs had been, the way a rock shaped like a face is closer to a face than a rock shaped like nothing. He ate it the way he had eaten everything aboard this ship, efficiently, without looking at it, his hands performing the mechanical work of lifting and chewing while the rest of him was somewhere else. That somewhere else was the problem. For 6 days, the crisis days, the days of pursuit and evasion and the rattling howl of the ship's hull under stresses the machine had not been designed to absorb, the somewhere else had been manageable. There was no room for it. When the body needed to fight, the body fought, and the mind served the body, and the somewhere else waited in the dark at the edge of attention like a dog trained not to approach the fire. Tigao had been good at this his entire life. The warriors of the Flower War were not men who did not feel. They were men who chose when to feel. The choosing was the discipline. The crisis was over. The combine recovery team was behind them. The ship, the Arveth, though Tigao still thought of it simply as the ship, the way a man swept down river does not name the log he clings to, had crossed some boundary that the modern woman said mattered. That the pursuer had turned back, the immediacy was gone, and the dog had come to the fire. Tigao set down the block of not food and looked at his hands. They were the same hands. The scar across the left knuckle, where Makiwa Whittle had turned in his grip during his third Flower War, was still there. The calluses were softening, 6 days without a weapon or a grinding stone or a rope, but the architecture was the same. These were the hands that had ground pigment for the temple painters when he was a boy, that had held his mother's wrists when she taught him to shape dough on the medite, laughing at his clumsiness, adjusting his pressure with her own hands wrapped around his until the motion became part of him. He looked at the block of not food. It was warm and dense in the color of clay. His mother's hands had made something else entirely. The Romani woman came in without announcing herself, which was how she always came in, as though she had been there the entire time and you were only now noticing. She carried her own portion of the synthesis output in one hand and a container of water in the other, and she sat down across from Tigao at the narrow console ledge that served as a table in the bay. She did not greet him. This was one of the things Tigao had come to understand about her in 6 days. She did not perform the rituals of approach unless she believed the other person wanted them. With the Roman, she was formal because the Roman needed form the way a vine needs a wall. With the Norse giant, she was blunt and warm because the giant was made of blunt warmth the way the ship was made of metal. With Tigao, she was quiet. She sat, she ate. She let the silence be a shared thing rather than an empty thing. He respected this more than he had words to say. She ate her portion slowly. She had the discipline of someone who had learned that food was not guaranteed and should therefore be honored, even when it was bad. Tanikot recognized this. He had known people who ate this way, the warriors who had come up from the Kalkoli districts where the harvest had been poor, who handled even festival food with careful deliberation. The silence held for a while. Comfortable. The synthesis machinery hummed its low industrial drone behind them, the sound that Tenigo had learned to read as functioning rather than threatening. His eyes' lighting was the same flat amber it always was. The Combine did not seem to understand that light could change. The Romany woman finished eating. She set her container of water on the ledge between them. She looked at Tigo with the expression he had come to associate with her, attention. The quality of attention that a healer gives to a wound they have been watching for days, waiting for the right moment to touch. "What did you eat?" she said, in the patchwork of combined words and gesture that served as their shared tongue. "The morning of a flower war." Tigo's hand stopped. He had expected other questions. What is a flower war? Why do you fight that way? What were the gods like? Those were the questions that circled him at a distance, the questions the others were too careful or too disinterested to ask, but that he could feel in the quality of their looking. The Romany woman was asking about what he had eaten, the specificity of it, the smallness. He looked at her, she waited. She had the patience of someone who had learned that asking questions before a person was ready produced silence, and she was giving him the room to decide. He decided, "Ground cold," Tigo said. The words came in Nahuatl first because they were Nahuatl words, and then in the fragments of combined trade language he had been accumulating like a man picking up stones from a riverbed. Food before, woman, stone, cold, morning. The Romany woman leaned forward. Her eyes moved as he spoke, and he understood that she was building the translation in her head in real time, matching his Nahuatl to the gestural and contextual framework she had constructed over 6 days of listening to everyone aboard. She was the only person on this ship who could do this. She was, Tigo had decided, the most dangerous person aboard because she could hear. The stone was cold, he said. She would grind it the night before in Hassa. He had not spoken this much in one stretch since. When? Since the cell. Since the moment he had stepped out of his cell and said Kuali to the empty corridor, and a single syllable of satisfaction that the world had presented him with a door, and he had opened it. Since then, actions, not words, the body's language only. The Norse giant understood the body's language perfectly. The Roman understood orders and responses. Neither of them required Tigo to do what the Romany woman was now asking him to do, which was to speak from the place where the dog slept by the fire. But the question she had asked was small enough, safe enough. It was about food. "You could hear it from the sleeping room," he said. He made the motion with his hands, the back and forth grinding rhythm of a mano on a mete, a motion so deeply embedded in his body that his hands performed it with the precision of a ritual. The Romani woman's eyes tracked his hands. The sound, the stone on stone. In the dark, the women of the house would grind it while we slept. My mother's sisters, my mother's mother, when she was alive. They ground the maize the night before because in the morning there was no time. He paused. The amber light of the synthesis bay pressed against his skin. The hum of the machinery was nothing like the sound he was describing, but for a moment both sounds existed in the same space inside his chest. "In the morning," he said, "it was already done. Cold, the shape of a hand. You ate it cold because there was no time to heat it. The drum was already calling. The cold was part of it. I ate it cold every time I went out." The Romani woman did not interrupt. She did not nod encouragingly or make sympathetic sounds. She sat with the same quality of stillness that Tigo himself used, the stillness of someone who understood that being witnessed was a form of respect, and that the witness must not move. "The last morning," Tigo said. His hands had stopped their grinding motion. They lay flat on the console ledge, the scar across his left knuckle pale under the amber light. The cold grain, she made it the way she always made it. I ate it the way I always ate it. The drum called, I went out. He did not say, and then I was here. He did not need to. The Romani woman had been taken from her own morning, her own last time, her own version of the drum calling and the cold food and the going out. Everyone on this ship had. The difference was that Tigo's going out had been toward a specific kind of death. The Flower War was combat for the taking of captives, sacred, structured, a negotiation between the warriors and the gods conducted in the vocabulary of blood and skill. Fear was not what the Flower War asked of its warriors. It asked for presence, full, absolute, ceremonial presence. And the cold maze in his stomach was part of that presence, the last mundane thing before the sacred thing, the body's anchor to the world it might be leaving. He had eaten it cold, he had gone out, and instead of the Flower War's resolution, capture, sacrifice, the sun fed, the cycle turning, something had reached down from a sky he had never imagined and pulled him into a cell that smelled of metal and ozone. The drum had called, he had answered. The world had changed its terms without consulting him. He stopped talking. The silence in the synthesis bay was thick and warm and smelled of the machine's inadequate attempt at food. The Romani woman reached across the ledge and placed her hand near his, not touching, but close enough that the warmth was there. She said nothing. She had opened the door. She did not walk through it for other people. The modern woman came in as though she had a purpose, which she usually did. She was carrying a data tablet, one of the flat combine devices she had commandeered and repurposed until it spoke a language she could read, and her attention was on it until she was 3 steps into the bay and heard Tigo's silence. There's a quality to the silence that stopped her. Tigo saw the moment her stride broke, a half step, a recalibration, the awareness that she had walked into something that had weight. Her eyes moved from the tablet to the two of them at the ledge. She wrote to the room the way the Romani woman read rooms, but with a different instrument. The Romani woman read emotion and intention. The modern woman read context and implication. Both arrived at the same conclusion at roughly the same speed. The modern woman set her tablet on the counter by the synthesis unit. She picked up a portion of the output, the same warm, dense block, and she sat down at the ledge, leaving one empty space between herself and the Romani woman. 3 of them at the table. The bay's lighting did not change, because the bay's lighting never changed, but something about the space altered. 3 women, Tigo would have said if anyone had asked him to describe it, except he was one of the 3 and he was not a woman. 3 people, the Romani healer, the modern navigator, the Mexica warrior, from times that the Combine's filing system would not have been able to distinguish 1480, 1487, 2019, 3 numbers that meant everything and nothing, 3 points on a line that the Combine would have classified as Tier 7, negligible, undifferentiated stock. The modern woman ate quietly for a moment. Then she said, in her own language and in fragments of Combine trade words woven through it, the language of someone who was accustomed to communicating across barriers and was good at it. I know what that became. Chiwilidiko looked at her. 500 years, she said. She called up 5 fingers, then closed the hand and opened it again. The Romani woman translated the gesture for Tigo with a quick murmured phrase in trade language, many, many seasons, 500 years and a lot of hands later. I ate something in that lineage. She touched her sternum. I, myself, this body. We called it aguali. The word came out round and specific, a word with weight. It wasn't the same. It was cold sometimes, from the night before. She paused. Something moved in her expression that Tigo recognized as the same thing he had been holding, the memory of a specific kitchen, a specific morning, a specific version of cold food eaten before the day's purpose began. We had it cold when there was no time. The room held still. Tigo understood, with the precision of a man who had spent his life reading the language of ritual and pattern, what she was telling him. The food was not the same. 500 years was more than enough to change everything. The grain, the preparation, the hands, the world. But the shape was the same, the cold was the same, the no time to heat it was the same. Something had passed from the hands he remembered to the hands she remembered, through 500 years of hands he would never know about. And it had arrived in a kitchen in a city he had never heard of, and it had been eaten cold. It was very still. The Romani woman watched them both. She did not translate. She did not need to. The bridge between what was and what came after was visible in the two of them, and she was the witness. The modern woman's face changed. Tigo saw it happen, the tension that came into her jaw, the way her eyes moved from his face to her hands, to the wall and back. He had seen this expression before, on the faces of war leaders who had information they were deciding how to deliver. The weight of knowing something that the other person needed to hear but that would change the shape of the world when it landed. I am going to have to tell him, Dika thought. And the thought was not new. She had carried it since the first day, since she had recognized his scarification patterns and his bearing in his language and understood, with the weight of an education she had never expected to use in this context, exactly who he was and where he came from and what happened to his people in the centuries after he left. Not everything, not tonight, but something that is true and does not destroy what he is holding. She looked at the Romani woman. The Romani woman met her gaze and gave the smallest possible nod, permission, or acknowledgement, or simply the recognition that this was happening and could not be prevented. What you came from, Dika said. She chose her words with the deliberation of someone diffusing a device, each selection weighed against the damage it might do. Trade language, fragmented, supplemented by gesture. The Romani woman provided murmured assistance where the grammar broke down. What you came from became something very large. Tigo did not move. It lit marks on the whole half of the world, she said. She spread her arms wide, encompassing, the gesture for a territory too large to walk. The people who came after you, a lot of them, everywhere. She touched the ledge between them, as though mapping something. Your language left traces in the world I came from. Some of it is still spoken. But as she stopped, she did not say, and then men came from across the ocean with weapons your people had never seen, and diseases your bodies had no defense against, and they burned the codices, and pulled down the temples, and ground the civilization to dust, and built their own on top of it. She did not say, the flower wars ended because the cycle was broken by men who did not know it existed and would not have cared if they did. She did not say, I know what your mother's name might have meant. I know the patterns on your skin. I studied your civilization in a classroom 500 years and an ocean away from where you lived it, and what I studied was the ruins. She said none of this. She held it the way you hold something sharp, and she looked at Tigo and she waited. Tigo sat in the amber light of the Synthesis Bay on a stolen ship between stars that had no names his people had given them, and he processed what the modern woman had told him. His civilization had grown. It had left marks, something of what he was. The language, the patterns, the shapes of things persisted in the world that came after. Changed of 500 years of change, but present. The way the cold maize preparation was present in the thing she called a gali, not the same but continuous, a thread that had not broken. He had no way to know what she was not telling him. He had no way to know that the thread had been nearly severed, that the continuity she was describing was the continuity of survival through catastrophe rather than an unbroken line. He did not know, and she was choosing not to make him know, and the moral decision she was making was harder than any choice Deka had faced on this ship, including the ones that involved navigation math and transponder codes and evasion trajectories. You will find out, she thought, from a database, from a star chart notation, from one of the 1,000 fragments of information this galaxy contains about what the Combine has catalogued of Earth. He will find out, and it will be worse if it comes from a machine. But not tonight. Tonight she would give him the part that was not loss, the part that said, you mattered, and what you made mattered, and it did not vanish when you were taken. Tigo looked at his hands again, the scar, the softening calluses, the architecture. He said nothing for a long time. Dika stood at the synthesis matrix after. The Romani woman had withdrawn, shifted to the far side of the bay, where she occupied herself with organizing the water containers, performing a task that required her hands and not her attention, leaving the space without vacating it. It was the most graceful exit Tigo had ever seen, and he had watched dancers in the great plaza of Tenochtitlan. He watched the modern woman work. She was programming the matrix with the quick, certain gestures he had observed over 6 days, her fingers moving across the interface the way his mother's hands had moved across the metate. The same quality of practiced intention. The machine responded to her the way the stone had responded to his mother, reluctantly at first, then with increasing compliance, as though the material recognized the authority of someone who understood its nature. She was building something. He understood this the way he understood it when a sculptor began to reveal the form inside the stone, by watching the choices, the corrections, the moments of hesitation and resolution. She was working from what he had told her and from something else, some knowledge she carried in her own hands, her own memory of cold grain eaten before the day began. The matrix produced its output, a dense shape, not a block this time. She had adjusted the parameters until the machine produced something that was approximately the shape of a hand-formed portion. The color was wrong, too yellow. Not enough of the dust-dyed gray that real nixtamalized maize carried. The texture, when she broke a corner off and tested it between her fingers, made her frown. She noted something on her tablet. She would try again later and again after that. This was who she was, a woman who refined, who iterated, who understood that the first attempt was information rather than failure. She brought it to the ledge where Tigo still sat. She set it in front of him. She did not explain it. She did not need to. Tigo picked it up. The weight was close, not right, but close, the way a brother resembles a brother. The temperature was close, cold, because she had programmed it cold, because she had heard him say that cold was part of it, and she had understood. He raised it to his mouth. He ate. The taste was off, a ghost of rightness. The maize had become something in the machine's interpretation that was almost maize and almost not, the way a word in a new language is almost the word you meant and almost not. But beneath the wrongness there was a structure that he recognized, the density, the way it sat in the mouth, the cold. The dog came to the fire and lay down and was quiet. Tigo set the remaining portion on the ledge. He looked at the modern woman who was watching him with fear and hope visible in equal measure. Fear that she had done harm, hope that she had done something else. Kuili Talin, he said. 2 words, Nahuatl. He did not translate them, and the modern woman did not ask. But the Romani woman across the bay heard them and understood enough of the shape to know that the first word was the one he had said stepping out of his cell. Kuili, the simplest satisfaction, and that here, in this context, with the synthesis output cooling in his hands and the memory of his mother's matai in his ears, the word carried a different weight entirely. Good enough, not right, not what it was, but close enough to grieve by and close enough to go on. They walked to the bridge together afterward. Tigo had not planned to. He had not planned anything since arriving on this ship that was not immediate and physical, but they were both going there, and the corridor was the same corridor, and neither of them moved to create distance. The ship hummed around them. The Arveth, the name the modern woman had given it 2 days ago, assembled from 6 words she had solicited from 6 worlds, carried them through the space between stars with the indifference of a river carrying leaves. The overhead lighting shifted from amber to a cooler blue-white as they moved from the lower decks to the bridge corridor, a transition Tigo still found unsettling. Light was supposed to come from fire or sun or moon, and this light came from nothing and served nothing. Indifferent woman walked with the gait she had developed over 6 days of shipboard life, efficient, shoulders slightly forward, one hand near the wall in case the gravity fluctuated. She had adapted to this place faster than anyone except possibly the Norse giant, though her adaptation was mental where his was physical. She understood the ship the way the giant understood a fight, as a set of conditions to be read and used. Tigo walked beside her. His own gait had not changed since the cell. He walked the way a warrior walked, balanced, centered, weight distributed for a change of direction at any moment. This ship had not given him a reason to walk differently. He doubted it ever would. At the junction before the bridge door, the place where the corridor widened slightly, where the ship's designers had created a brief architectural breath before the main operational space, Tigo stopped. The modern woman took one more step before she realized he had stopped. She turned, the blue-white overhead light found the planes of her face, and for a moment she looked at Tigo like someone his people would have carved in stone, defined, purposeful, carrying something larger than herself. He said something in Nahua. It was not a word she knew. It was not one of the trade language fragments they shared, not a number or direction or designation. It was a phrase with structure and weight, spoken with the cadence Tigo used for things that mattered, the same register as the prayer she had heard him whisper once, facing the observation port, his lips moving in the dark. She shook her head slightly. I don't understand. Tigo looked at her for a moment. His expression was not the controlled mask he wore on the bridge or the blank efficiency he wore in the corridor. It was open in the way that a door is open, not wide, but unlatched. Something behind it was visible. He searched for the words. The handful of combined trade language they shared was a blunt instrument for what he was trying to say, a vocabulary designed for cargo manifests and operational commands repurposed by the desperate for the work of being human. He found what he could. She, he said in trade language. He touched his chest, the one I spoke of. Who carried? He made a motion with both hands, forward, outward, the gesture for continuing, persisting, not stopping. Carried it forward. She who carried it forward. Dika stood in the blue-white light at the junction before the bridge door and received this. She did not know if he meant the food, the cold maize, the ugali, the threat of grain and hunger, and mornings before purpose that connected his hands to hers across 500 years. She did not know if he meant the civilization, the marks on half a continent, the language traces, the knowledge she carried of what his people had built and what had been done to them. She did not know if he meant something else entirely, something in the Nahuatl original that the trade language translation could not hold. She thought about it for the rest of the day. She thought about it during her watch at the navigation console, tracking the Orveth's heading toward the cluster of stars the Combine had marked as avoided. She thought about it while she ran course corrections and checked the transponder broadcast and monitored the silence where a Combine recovery signal should have been and wasn't. She thought about it while Pakla settled into the adjacent station and began reading the star field ahead with the quiet intensity of a woman who saw terrain where others saw emptiness. She who carried it forward. On the observation port above the bridge, the avoided stars grew incrementally closer, and the Arveth's name went ahead of it into territory no one aboard had mapped, and in the synthesis bay 3 decks below, a portion of not quite right cold maize sat on the ledge where Tigo had left it, cooling toward the temperature of the ship, which was cooling toward the temperature of space, which was as close to nothing as anything could be and still exist. The Romani woman had cleared the other portions and cleaned the containers and left this one alone. It sat there for hours. No one touched it. Eventually, the ship's maintenance cycle cleared it automatically because the ship did not understand what it was, and the machine that had made it did not remember making it, and the systems that ran the Arveth were Combine systems built for Combine purposes by Combine engineers who had never once, in 10,000 years of designing machines for the management of cargo, considered the possibility that cargo might grieve. But it had been there, and Tigo had tasted it, and the word he had used, Quali Talen, good enough, was the word of a man who understood that what survives is never what was lost, and that the distance between the two is where you learn to live. He took his position on the bridge. Dike read the stars. The Arveth flew on.